Hello, welcome back to another YouTube video. Today on my 15.4 ADC tier list. So for your content, like, subscribe, and let's get into it. There were a couple of changes this patch. Most notably, we saw nerfs towards Hui, Kog'Maw, Mel, and Kalista, with buffs towards Ashe and Yasuo. We saw an adjustment towards Twitch, which was the Axiom Arcanist change. His ult now counts as single target, as AoE damage rather than single target damage, so he has lost some level of amplification there. We also saw IE have its cost reduced at the cost of 5 AD. The item's still better. You want it earlier on, or you get access to that spike earlier on, so it has really benefited the champions which opt into it. And let's get into the tier list. So the D tier is going to consist of 4 champions at the moment. Right at the bottom we have Mel. Mel took a pretty heavy hit this patch. She lost a lot of win rate across support, mid lane and bot lane. Overall, I imagine the champion will probably get buffed in 15.6 as they're not hasty to buff it. It hasn't been buffed in 15.5. Probably over concerns of it overtaking the last stand, which is the world's MSI kind of thing happening at the moment in competitive. The champion, just lost a lot of her power budget. Her E got weaker as a spell earlier on into the game, so did her Q. It has less range, and her W, I believe, now requires an even snappier timing to get full use out of it, plus the reflection's weaker as well. So the champion lost a decent amount of power. It sits in the D tier at the moment. Wouldn't really recommend playing it outside of like a flex counter pick option, or if you put a lot of time into it, but her skill ceiling isn't even that high. It's definitely one of the lowest we've seen for a new champion release over like the last 4 years. So be aware of that. Wouldn't really recommend picking her unless you are using it as a flex and you're really comfortable on the champion for the most part. Other pick here is Kalista. She got nerfed this patch. Her competitive, she was just taking over competitive. That was the issue with the champion. They went after her percentage health damage on her W. Makes sense. It's going to be something which is more elite and competitive skewed. The lower down you go, the less people will play around your mark on your W. That combined with, the champions is just innately elite skewed. It's not a pick I'm really going to recommend for the average player. If you're willing to put the time into it, it's still decent. It will still do relatively similar damage. Obviously, the joint damage is going to be lower, but if you're just stacking up spears, rending, hitting Qs, it's all relative. I mean, it's similar to the pre-patch, and those things haven't been adjusted. So Kalista, a champion which I'd only really recommend unless if you're comfortable on it. Otherwise, wouldn't really recommend it at the moment. The other 2 champions here are Kai'Sa and Smolder. Kai'Sa's just been struggling solo queue for a while. I dropped her down last patch and she maintains her spot within the D tier. Just a pick I wouldn't really recommend. Her AP builds aren't doing too well at the moment, and her just general static static Ginsu Nasha variant is just underperforming. So she sits here. If you're very comfortable with the champion, then she can still get you results. I don't think there is a definitive I don't think most of the ADC options are bad. They all have spots where you can play them and still get results. Just for D tier options, I would recommend below some of the other options higher up. But overall, ADC role isn't too disjointed. You can pick S plus options and you can pick D tier options, and you can win more with some of the D tier options than the S plus option at the moment. So keep that in mind. Just play what you're really comfortable with, but this is a general framework for what I believe are the powerful picks at the moment. Smolder maintains his spot within the D tier. Benefited from the IE change. Obviously, in 15.3 they made it so his Q benefits from the IE crit damage modifier. That was really nice. It now encourages him building this item as second. The buff to make it cheaper this patch also helped him. He's still just underperforming. He's not quite C tier, but you can consider him C tier if you're very comfortable on him. You can consider him a bit higher. This champion obviously isn't the same level of powerhouse as a lot of the other ADCs early on in the game. He requires a bit of time to ramp and really get going within the game, but if you get access to his stack breakpoints, then he can definitely be really oppressive. He has decent wave clear, good AoE damage. This champion is on the verge of really coming into the ADC meta, but it's just a little bit below at the moment. Moving on to the C tier then. We lead off with Samira, who's doing a bit better at the moment. The direct buff towards her, combined with IE being a bit cheaper, helped her. It was a nice change. She still has no build diversity. Her build is almost always going to be Collector, i.e. Shieldbow, LDR, BT. You can obviously alternate Shieldbow and LDR depending on whether you need it within the game, but the champion, yeah, still running identical items, is going to suffer a bit with skill caps being nerfed. She was a champion which oftentimes opted into it a bit more, as she wasn't, so she just isn't as reliant on attack speed compared to other marksmen. But she's, yeah, doing a bit better at the moment. Sits as more like a mid to high-end C-tier option, but it's like, there's not a huge amount of C-tier champions, so yeah, it sits within that mix. Felios, doing pretty decently at the moment. Like, Felios is, by all accounts, actually good in his current state. He is hard to play. That is the main thing, though. Like, that is why I don't have him higher. I think this champion requires a lot of game time and just knowledge to really, like, pick up and perform on. If you have that, like, if you perform well on him, and, like, he's being buffed in 15.5, I would really recommend playing this champion at the moment. Like, even to learn, like, I would recommend picking up Aphelios as an option. Most people won't play against him a huge amount, so they won't understand just how much damage he can output. He's great hyper carry capability. He is vulnerable by the fact that he has no dashes, but the champion doing decently at the moment, so I definitely recommend trying him out. IE buffs also do help him, so yeah, sits within the C tier at the moment, but definitely has a lot more room to go up if you put the mastery into him. Lucian is underperforming. I think that's just where I'd have him at the moment. He, like, unlike Aphelios, where I'd say he has like really like lots of room to grow if you put the time into him. Lucian does have a skill curve that is obviously very apparent, but not to the same extent as Aphelios. I think the champion's just slightly on the weaker side at the moment. Obviously, if you're very comfortable playing Lucian, he has some really good pairings, and if you're like duoing with someone who plays some of these pairings, he can really like thrive as a champion, especially within the mid game. That is where he really like benefits from the likes of Nami, for example. But he's, yeah, slightly underperforming at the moment, sits as more like a C tier option. Draven, an incredibly volatile, aggressive marksman. Like, you can win games really quickly with this champion. You can also lose games very quickly as well. Like, you can find yourself falling behind and then feeling really worthless compared to some of the other options. He needs to thrive, like, as a pick. He wants to get early kills. He wants to snowball games. He wants to close out games by 20 minutes. And that is just not a consistent way of playing, especially in lower elos, like mid to low elo. In high elo, he's still one of the better marksman options. People still ban him in competitive because of Kalista priority. He is a champion which can really nullify certain options with the amount of damage he does early on to the game. He can be really threatening if you main the champion, so do be aware. I think Draven is another pick which can definitely aggressively climb if you have a lot of mastery on the champion, but he's weaker in low elo purely based on game length going longer. Like, he just doesn't want to be in long games. He will be outvalued by other marksmen. Dropping down, actually no more champions are dropping down, but it is my C tier. Moving on to the B tier then, we have Brand, who is underperforming in general at the moment. He should be slightly better. He is really impressive with Nami pairings. Like, this champion can really consistently land his skill shot, and it's really trivialized when you pair him with, obviously, Nami, which gives him slows and a CC. He can follow up on it and definitely do a huge amount of damage. I don't think he's a pick you can play. I mean, you can play him in most games if you are looking for an AP bot laner. I would recommend other things over him. He doesn't scale that well into elite play. He really struggles once you get to like your diamonds and higher. He sits more like a B2 option. Bot lane is probably his best role at the moment. Mid, support, and jungle all underperform. Jungle's basically gone at this point. Sits as a low B2 option, though, at the moment. I think he is pretty... I mean, he's incredibly conditional with the supports you compare him with. He will underperform compared to Nami pairing, which is like the one you want to put him with. Ziggs is just not doing as well at the moment. I actually have some of the AP options here, the Lux, the Ziggs, and the Cassiopeia. In the case of Cassiopeia, she's more like a high beta option, but I'll talk about her in a second. In Ziggs' case, he has just been nerfed. Okay, so end of last season, they nerfed him, tried to like tackle his incredibly obnoxious sieging potential for competitive, and it basically knocked him out of competitive. He's seen very few games as as what was considered the most common AP option within the bot lane, and that's unfortunate to see. I do think the champion could do with some buffs. I think for the average play, he's probably balanced when you put him in the A tier, but for the moment I'd say he's slightly on the weaker side. But most magic damage options can be good purely on the basis that most people just don't understand how to play against them well, and will consistently get hit by skill shots, allow you to just push in and then like look to roam or just get full comboed and chunked. They're not bad options, but they are a bit more reliant on just like poor understanding of how to play against them. Lux, for example, prefers like specific pairings where you can consistently rotate your full combo into a target. She's good burst damage, but you need to be ahead of the curve. If you're behind the curve and you fall like really far behind in games, you will really struggle. You'll be punished for it. Cassiopeia prefers short-range compositions. Makes her harder to play in the bot lane. I think it is an okay role for her. I think mid and top are still her premier and best roles at the moment. Like, she is very good in both those roles. I'd say she sits as more like a B-tier option in bot lane. She's someone who can conditionally come out every so often. Shouldn't be your main AP option, but can be like a secondary or a third option if you feel comfortable with it. Xayah, conditional marksman. I think in good spots where you can get a lot of value out of her art and self-peeling tools, she can be really valuable. She doesn't have the same range and DPS as some of the other marksmen, and that can definitely hurt her. She isn't going to hyper carry quite the same as some of them, and yeah, I'd say that's where she really loses value. But in the right spot, she does jump up the tier list. She's a bit harder to play though. You do want to be able to utilize the full extent of her kit to really have value. Jhin is fine. This champion is not doing as well as he was last season. Like, last season, Jhin was pretty good across the across majority of it. But nerfs towards lethality items for marksman combined with direct nerfs towards him, like I think he got hit by like 3 in a row or something, have just left him in a bit weaker of a spot at the moment. He doesn't have the same level of, I mean, he has nowhere near the DPS of most marksmen. He has very low DPS, in fact. His damage is high, like that is where he really shines as an option. His long-range artillery setup CC, that's definitely more of what he is at the moment, whereas like previously you could kind of like just have him as a pretty solid damage option and like win games through it. He does require to play around his setup a bit more, which makes him a bit more comp dependent. But Jhin has a harder time getting through tanks. He's vulnerable to assassins, and overall as a pick, I think his consistency just isn't as high as some of the other options, which is why I just don't really recommend him as much. Varus and Ezreal are, actually I'll talk about Zeri first. I'm going to talk about Varus and Ezreal. In Zeri's case, she's just doing better at the moment. Buffs towards the likes of Lulu, direct buffs towards some of the items she uses, like the Yuntals and IE, for example, have really helped her, and she's definitely found her footing this season. She has seen some competitive play, and yeah, if you're very comfortable playing Zeri, I think she's a solid option. You can definitely pick her up, play her in a decent amount of spots, and she is a good hyper carry. Isn't going to be as strong as some of the other options early on in the game, but is her biggest vulnerability. But if enemy team has poor lockdown and you're able to freely ramp and output a lot of damage within team fights, she can be a very valuable champion to play. Ezreal and Varus. So both these two are incredibly popular and competitive at the moment. Varus for his flexibility of builds combined with just his like amazing setup ultimate. Like, Varus ultimate is one of the strongest ultimates you have access to as an ADC. It is incredibly valuable. It can allow an ADC to find picks, which is relatively rare. Like, Varus and Ashe are obviously very unique in that aspect, and there's a reason why they are very common in competitive. Ashe obviously has been a bit weaker towards the beginning of this split, but I'll talk about her in a second because she got buffed this patch. But in Varus's case, yeah, lethality Varus really good for like long range harass, which is going to be permanent within a lot of fights where they can't really sustain through it, and your team is giving you the setup you need. Hyper carry DPS Varus is still really nice though. It does a huge amount of damage. The attack speed cap being moved up was really nice for him if you are pairing him alongside the likes of Lulu. And as a champion, yeah, he's good flexibility. He can be also played in the top lane if that is what you're looking for. He can opt into durability, which is very nice to have as a marksman with good base damage values. So Varus is a bit harder to play, and I don't think he is a champion which you are as consistently going to win on as some of the other options. But if you are looking for a pick which will take you all the way to the heights of Challenger, if you are like piloting it well, then Varus is a perfect option. Ezreal also, Ezreal has next to no build flexibility. If we're talking about Varus and flexibility, Ezreal has none of that. Like, Ezreal's build is almost always going to be Trinity, Manamune, Shojin, the pen item, which has gone from my mind at the moment, and into BT. Grudge, that's the one. Like, there is next to no flexibility outside of that. Like, you might sometimes pick up a more Frozen Heart, but these items don't really perform as well on Ezreal just generally. They're like very niche circumstance options. Overall, Ezreal though, he scales with the driver of the champion, the pilot. Like, if you pilot Ezreal well, he can be incredible. He can be one of the most valuable marksmen you can play at the moment. The biggest flexibility within Ezreal is his rune options. PTA, Conqueror, and Lethal Tempo have all like picked up as like options people can opt into every so often. PTA is standard. Like I would recommend running PTA in 70% of your games. There are games where Tempo and your being able to consistently auto attack can be quite valuable, and we see it a decent amount in competitive. It allows you also to shove the wave. Like you can attack a champion, stack up tempo, and then use that tempo to then push a bit faster, crushing waves. It does make it a bit more elite skewed within that aspect, and also like maintaining stacks. Like Ezreal just requires a good amount of like an incredibly high amount of practice on the champion to really get full value out of it. But yeah, the main things I would recommend looking at is like haste compared to bloodline, coup de grace compared to cut down. Like I would recommend cut down on Ezreal. I'd also recommend haste over bloodline, but bloodline can be really nice if you're looking for a bit more durability. And then try Jack of all trades. Jack of all trades performs really well on Ezreal as you can access it really early on. Like if you get 1.3k gold and you're getting a Sheen tier, that is first proc of Jack of all trades combined with five haste coming in, which is huge. It's really valuable. It gives you a really nice spike early on into the game. Definitely don't sleep on it. And I'd say Ezreal, yeah, if you pilot him well, incredible. One of the best ADCs in the game. If you pilot him poorly, he will suffer. He will struggle compared to other champions, which are going to consistently output more DPS than him, or like easier to consistently output more DPS. I'm stumbling over words. Anyway, moving on to the A tier then. We have Seraphine. Actually, Seraphine's going to drop down to the B tier. I've got a couple of champions dropping down to the B tier, in fact. Seraphine and Hui are both going to drop down to the B tier. I'll move them towards the higher end with Cassiopeia. In Hui's case, he got nerfed this patch, and it was a decent nerf. He lost a lot of chip damage, and that means something for Hui, which is like where his main value comes in. It's just how much chip damage and stall potential he has. That, like, losing some of that value is definitely going to hurt the core reason you are playing him, and that does drop him down from the S tier to the B tier, in my opinion. Seraphine's case, she was a low A tier option last patch. I probably had her slightly overrated. She's being buffed in 15.5, though, so be aware of that. She'll probably just get bumped right back up to the A tier. She's a bit of a jack of all trades. She does good. She can do damage. She can do CC. She can do heals and shields. She's not the best at any of them in most aspects, and her damage isn't on the higher side at the moment. She's definitely lacking a bit in that department, which is where they are buffing her, and I think that is the correct spot to buff her at the moment. And yeah, with those changes, it'll help with wave clear, it'll help with trading, and I think she'll find herself as a decent A tier option next patch. Other champions which are dropping down are actually no more. So Tristana is the champion which is going to lead off the A tier. She has been creeping up over time. She was in my D tier like 5 patches ago, where I heavily underrated her. Like, the problem with Tristana was basically people had to kind of relearn the champion. She's not the same champion she was middle of last season when she was really dominating the mid lane meta. She has definitely changed. Her damage has been shifted around. Her wave clear is different. It's not the same as it was, where you could like get the last tier AoE splash and like consistently clear waves. They've tagged that quite a bit. It's definitely more about autoing waves if you're looking for crash, and a lot of her damage has been like pushed into her late game. She's also been pushed more towards the gold scaling over level scaling, and yeah, that's meant something. So Tristana definitely sits as a low A tier option compared to the B tier where I had her last patch. I think this champion's definitely on the rise, and if you enjoy her, she's doing a lot better at the moment. Other picks are the likes of Veigar and Karthus and Victor. These are my A tier AP options. I don't think there is an S tier AP option at the moment. I think a lot of these have their issues. In Veigar's case, he's incredibly low elo skewed, and it really shows. Like, he suffers a lot more the higher up you go, where you're just not going to consistently get to the breakpoints you need to really find your value within the game. His damage has been obviously pushed towards level scaling, like it's like all AP ratio breakpoints, and yeah, shorter games and higher elo. Definitely he suffers from that. The lower down you go though, mid to low elo, he still does fine. Like, he is a decent A tier mid lane option. I have him as and bot lane option, and I think he really deserves a spot within my A tier at the moment. In Karthus' case, he's really unpopular, and that is one of the biggest strengths of the champion. People just won't respect how much damage you do early. He is one of the strongest ultimates within the game, and yeah, the pick is just doing decently at the moment. Like, he has an incredibly high skill ceiling. Like, you want to put a lot of time into Karthus to really get a lot of value out of him. But if you're a Karthus main in bot lane at the moment, you're probably doing pretty well. So if you really enjoy the champion and you really want to play him somewhere, play him in the bot lane and you should find good results. Victor got nerfed a couple of times ever since his like ASU, his visual update, and he's definitely not doing as well at the moment. But as a bot lane option, he's a fine AP pick here. You can flex him from mid to bot. You can just pick him as a raw AP bot laner. I don't think there is a definitive best. Like, Hui would have been my definitive best in the previous patch in 15.3, but I think some of the A2 options, if you are comfortable with them, can be really valuable in their specific spots. In Swain's case, he got buffed more recently, and that really helped him. It gives him a bit more durability, it gave him a bit more damage, and having access to maybe another ult rotation with that additional health you are now getting through your passive, or having a bit more damage through the E, it's just nice for him. He did get hit by the Fimbulwinter nerfs in 15.3. Was it 15.4 or this patch? No, to be honest with this patch. In 15.4, obviously, this patch. Fimbulwinter got nerfed, and the Rylai Fimbulwinter was one of the core builds he was going. You can opt into other things, but if you're going that route, you are going to notice the shield is just not as strong. So do be aware of that. Swain, still great into short range composition, so I think that is where he really shines as a champion at the moment. Corki is my recommended premier early game pick if you are looking for a champion with great wave clear, great early game damage, and you can stat check most options on a pick you don't need to put a huge amount of time in to really get a lot of value out of. I think Corki is a great option. His ban rate and his frustration and his overall perception of power are inflated because he is early game skewed. It's the same reason why Draven is banned a lot. People who people often take laning phase as the most important feels kind of area for a champion. You could have a pick which is basically really bad later on into the game, but if that early game is incredibly oppressive, people will traditionally ban it. Corki definitely falls pretty hard into that vein. This pick though is valuable. I really do recommend people learn Corki as an option. I think in his current state he is a great champion to have within your arsenal. So my other A tier options include Caitlyn and Vayne. I think Vayne sits towards the lower end of the A tier. I think Caitlyn sits towards the middle of the A tier. And I think Siva's somewhere in here as well. In Vayne's case, she hasn't so much benefited from the item changes as much as some of the other marksmen, but in general has just been performing a bit better as of recent. She is a good solo queue carry champion. She does struggle into the level of range some marksmen can have, and she can definitely be pushed back towards her tower, and if she finds herself in those spots, it will feel quite bad to play Vayne, but she scales really well. Her side lane threat is incredibly high. Her hyper carry and individual carry potential are really high, and I think that really as a champion that's really valuable and really helps her as a solo queue option. In the case of Siva, she's a great hyper carry, outputting a huge amount of DPS once you get your 1, your 2 item spikes. Having access to Yuntels and IE at the moment can allow her to do a huge amount of damage in fights. I think she is a bit more conditional. You want to pick her into matchups where you can get really good value out of Spell Shield, and where you're not going to just find yourself really struggling to CS, as she does want to reach those breakpoints. But in her current state, she is a very solid A tier option. The other pick here is Caitlyn. Caitlyn's range can really allow her to bully out certain lanes. The problem with Caitlyn though is she is hard to play. She requires good macro to really get value out of a champion. If you're not consistently sieging on this pick and you're not utilizing the full extent of your range, you would be better off playing other champions. Obviously, once you get to your later game points, she can just one-shot champions. It's kind of like the Graves of the bot lane, where once you get to a certain point, you don't need to the macro value of the champion just isn't going to be as present as the just the full-on damage value of the pick. Graves will just one-shot a target later on into the game. You could just flash into someone's face and delete them. Caitlyn can land one trap and just delete a target. So she just become, I would honestly say, easier to play as the game goes on. But her early laning is where this pick really shines. If you can play her early laning well, she is an incredibly oppressive option. If you can't, you're probably just better off looking for other picks. Dropping down from the S tier to the A tier is Twitch. Twitch took a pretty solid hit this patch with the Axiom Arcanist nerf. He was running it pretty much every single game. People have realized just how strong the rune was on him, and the nerfs to the rune directly on Twitch, I believe it's 5% less. It's 14 to 9% going from single target to AoE. You're losing 5% damage on your ultimate, and that means something. So Twitch doing a bit worse now. Obviously the Yuntels buffs did help him if you are opting into it. Obviously Bork is still something Twitch is going quite a bit, but he's just doing a bit worse now. So he sits as more a low A tier option in his current state. The S tier then, I am adding Nyla, Yasuo, Jinx to my S tier. In the case of Ashe, she got buffed really heavily this patch. The 10% bonus AD ratio on W was really nice for her, combined with the 1 to 5% scaling ratio on Q. The ult damage going up by a flat 50 at all ranks, and the ult AoE damage going from 50% to 100% was just a lot of damage to add on to this champion. She went from a C tier option to an S tier option. She's being nerfed in 15.5. It will probably drop her to the high end of A, but she is back to being a really good early, mid, late option. Like, she has... But the thing with Ashe is her utility is almost always going to be valuable, so even if you fall behind, you still have that as a fallback pattern. The thing she was lacking before was her main pattern was just not great. Like, you were playing her almost always like a fallback pattern, but now she has good damage, and that can allow her to contest more consistently within lane, within mid lane, and within general trades. And overall, I think the pick is deserving of an S tier spot at the moment. In the case of Nyla, I've bumped her back up from the high end of the A tier to the low end of the S tier. I think this champion is just incredibly valuable with the right pairings. Like, if you pair Nyla with the likes of Taric, with Senna, and just generally with picks, which she can really abuse her passive with, she is a very, very powerful option. Her damage and burst are incredibly high, and like, she has great carry potential. Most people don't understand how to play against her, which also plays into her advantage, and I think that does enable her to be an S tier option. Yasuo got buffed this patch. The crit modifier on his Q went from 90% to 100%, so it is at full value. It is huge because this allows him to scale better. This also allows him to spike more aggressively on a crit cloak. Like, if you get in a cloak of agility early and you RNG maybe 1-2 crits within a trade, that is a huge amount of damage you are getting through Yasuo. So be aware, like, you want to pick up, like, yeah, your crit cloaks, getting like your shield bow, your IE online earlier on into the game, like maximizing your gold income, all very valuable. Yasuo's best role is ADC. Like, the fact that he has access to wind wall and he traditionally does well into ranged matchups in a role with primarily ranged matchups, it just makes a lot of sense. Like, Yasuo should be good in the bot lane. I'm surprised more people don't play him, but definitely, if you are a Yasuo enthusiast, he is really good in the bot lane at the moment. Definitely recommend picking up the champion. He spikes harder on 2-3 items and then scales better, as you are no longer getting weaker damage numbers through picking up AD and critting with it. You are getting the full value of the damage, which most marksmen get access to when they crit on a champion. So yeah, really good S tier option. My other two S tier options which remain are Kog'Maw and MF. In Kog'Maw's case, he got nerfed this patch. I believe it was 0 to 20 damage off Q with a 10% AP ratio buff. It's very small. It doesn't do a huge amount. He's still a very powerful champion within the ADC role. The main thing is the fact that Lulu got nerfed, and that is going to affect him more than probably his direct nerf. So definitely, I mean, I think it's healthier to not be as attached to Lulu as Kog'Maw, but he will lose power when you are pairing him with that combo, and it is still an incredibly oppressive combo, especially with the attack speed cap being moved from 2.5 to 3. In MF's case, she is still performing really well. She is my recommended, like, easy to play ADC. Like, if you are Iron to Plat, Emerald, then MF is probably the pick I would really recommend, alongside Jinx. Like, Jinx is my premier pick of the patch. I think if you're looking for something really good for, yeah, like lower elos, MF as like a caster marksman with a really trivialized trading pattern is a great option. If you're looking for a hyper carry with great scaling and performing really well at the moment, Jinx is probably my recommendation there. And if you're looking for something early game, which is a bit easier to play than some of the other early game champions, like if you think about it, like Kalista and Draven are two of your early game champions, and then Corki's your third. Like, Corki is so much easier to play than these two champions. You don't have to put as anywhere near many games into him to really find the results which you're looking for. So Corki, definitely a champion I'd recommend picking up. But yeah, my picks of the patch: Jinx, MF, Corki, Ashe if you're looking for something with CC, and if you're looking for something which is a bit more unique, then Yasuo. Yasuo, I think, is really performing at the moment. The buffs towards Yuntao's next patch, I don't actually think will do enough to encourage him building it first. I mean, some people will test it, and honestly, there is a chance it could become a really popular first option for him if you are not going to get as much bulk value within the game, but it is worth just looking at it before you really, like, fully invest in the Yuntao's. But yeah, those are my thoughts for the 15.4 ADC tier list. Thank you guys for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Goodbye.